Good morning and welcome to the Daily Cyber Briefing for Wednesday, the 26th of June. I just couldn't remember what day it was then. I'm Stephen Ridgway. So, although we normally kick off with vulnerabilities and other bits and pieces, today we're just going to touch for 10 seconds on something that's all over the news at the moment. Julian Assange has pleaded guilty to whatever it is that in the end that the US government accused him of. He has therefore been released. Interesting concept. You plead guilty and don't go to jail, but there we are. He is now heading off to Australia. The only thing I think that's really of interest to this, apart from the fact that this has been going on forever, and regardless of what you may think of Assange and Assange, I don't even know how you pronounce his surname. Whether what he was doing was crusading for free speech or literally just putting people in danger and making a name for himself because he's a narcissist, I don't know. I don't greatly care. He does, by the way, have to delete any copies of any confidential or state secret information that he may well still have. So there we go. Julian's back off to Australia. Good luck to the Australians. There is a new malware variant based on the reasonably well-known Medusa malware that targets Android users. This has re-emerged, focusing on 7 countries at the moment: France, Italy, United States, Canada, Spain, the UK, and Turkey as well. It's been being tracked since around May, and is a rewrite, a more efficient version of the Medusa malware. So it's a banking Trojan, and it functions as malware as a service. Originally discovered in 2020. Provides key logging, screen controls, SMS manipulation, those sorts of things. There is a good write-up in Bleeping Computer that gives good indication of how it works and also what's new in the new variant. Apart from being more lightweight, it also requires fewer permissions on the on the Android device. It requires fewer permissions than the earlier versions did, and there's some nice illustrations of what they've changed with that. You might be able to pick out some indicators of attack or indicators of compromise from this article. So if you are running Android on your devices, I would recommend you take a look at this. Because it is reasonably sophisticated, well worth being aware of what it does and how it gets to onto the devices. So hopefully that will be useful for you. There are over 100,000 websites affected by hijacked polyfill supply chain attack. Now, okay, so these things are relatively common. However, this one I thought it would be good to bring to your attentions because polyfill.io was used for legitimate purposes originally. It's a popular library incorporating support for modern functions in web browsers. The concerns were raised with Polyfill earlier this year in February because a Chinese-based content delivery network called Funnel, Funnull, bought Polyfill. now that they've owned it, it's become clear that the JavaScript library polyfill.gs has been modified to redirect users to malicious and scam sites. So, well, there is a direct issue around that. So, if you are using these components, then you may well find that the things that are happening are not on your customers or your browser users devices are not what you'd actually anticipated. The original creator of the project, a chap called Andrew Betts, has urged website owners to immediately remove it, saying basically, and I think he's got a very good point here, no website today requires any of the polyfills in the polyfill.io library. Most of the features added to the web platform were quickly adopted by all major browsers, and some exceptions generally can't be polyfilled anyway. So you don't need it, and it is now owned by an organization that is looking to subvert it for malicious purposes. I think that is in itself interesting. I think what is even more interesting is that the market in organizations, companies, or whatever that provide these sorts of services does leave you open to supply chain attacks, in the sense of, if the Chinese government chooses to buy up something, it could, Chinese or anybody else, threat actors, if they can buy a domain or if they can buy a whole company that provides services one way or another, you could find yourself moving from having a very useful set of tooling, let's say, in the background, through to having a load of malware. What can we do about it? Well, I think that it raises the question of how one does third-party security assessments or third-party risk assessments. I think it also shows that you need to be on top of who actually not only what's the company's reputation, blah blah blah, the usual sort of stuff, financial due diligence, whatever, with security suppliers, how do they secure their stuff, whatever, who owns them. There are services out there that will give you that information. The famous one would be Dun and Bradstreet. What is a Credit Safe? I think is one that I've used and found to be very good. So you can get the information. You can also set up alerting on these things. But whether you would know to set up monitoring on, let's say, Polyfill, polyfill.io, it's a good question, as it's probably not high on your list of third-party risk. Why would it be? It just provides some functionality to browsers. Except if you've got a site which is primarily e-commerce, and you've got this stuff on there, and you could then find yourself in trouble. Yeah, very difficult. I think this raises some interesting questions to which I'm not entirely sure that we have simple answers. But yeah, worth being vigilant. Okay, now here's an interesting concept. Article in the Register that I came across this morning talks about crypto scammers circling back, posing as lawyers, and then stealing an extra $10 million. Truly devious plan is how they've described it in the article. Comes from information from the FBI, so I think we can be reasonably confident that it is at least we can have some confidence that it's right and accurate. Basically, the scammers have been involved in crypto exchange fraud, basically stealing information from crypto, or stealing, in fact, cryptocurrency from crypto exchanges. They then go back to the victims posing as lawyers looking to be able to recover the stolen cryptocurrency. And it appears that they then charge the customers and fleece them. Extraordinary. So, as always, be extra vigilant after any kind of compromise. There are the criminal versions of ambulance chasers all over the place. So if anybody is after an incident, if anybody is contacting you cold, saying, "Hey, look, we can help you with that," be very cautious. One of the downsides of disclosing breaches is that the information then becomes public. Obviously, that's what the disclosure is about. But one level, that's a very good thing, because it does mean that, at least, your customers or other interested parties are aware of what's going on, and it does put a focus on dealing with these things properly rather than just hushing them up and pretending they never happened. The other side of it is, though, that once it is known that you've been, let's say, breached, or whatever has happened, opens you up, as this shows, to scammers looking to capitalize on the fact that most organizations, after, say, a major breach or a ransomware attack or whatever it may be, are often in a not necessarily in a state of chaos, but they are not as vigilant as they would normally be during BAU, and things like this may well look attractive. So just be careful if you have been attacked. If you've been attacked and it isn't compromised and it hasn't become public yet, and yet you're still getting these sorts of calls, you can be fairly confident they're not legit. If, however, it is public knowledge and you receive contact from groups or people that you were not expecting to, treat that with skepticism. People coming out of the blue who genuinely can and will help you are rare. They do exist, but the likelihood is, unless you've gone out and researched and chosen them, it's probably not the right thing to do to engage with them. And then finally from me today, sometimes it's good to circle back through previous breaches, previous security incidents, especially things that were significant and in the public eye. Often there's a lot of speculation going on at the time, but it all tails off quite quickly. This particular article in Dark Reading is a very useful summary of what happened to the British Library last year and where they are now. So, it talks a little bit about what happened, what did the attackers do. So there's some stuff you can learn there. I mean, basically stuff like, copying network drives, keyword scans for things like passport and confidential and whatever, and copying off those files, and then using native, in fact, you living off the land stuff. So utilities that existed to administer networks were hijacked, created copies of databases, so on and so forth. But I think what is good is that in this article is that they point out 5 things that you can do that would reduce the likelihood of a successful breach on the scale of the British Library attack, and will reduce the impact if you do get breached. And they are very straightforward things, things that we are all aware of, but may not always actually deal with. But the first one on the list is assess your technical debt. I've talked about end of life quite a lot over the last few months. Bear in mind that software and hardware has an end of life. Okay. Now, there are lots of different ways you can define end of life. There's end of sale, that some people call end of life. There's end of routine engineering. There's end of security patch. If it's hardware, there's also the end of hardware support, as in if it blows up, we won't be replacing it. Now, all of those have got present different levels of risk to the organization. However, the two, for me, that really matter are firstly, end of hardware support, as in if there are vulnerabilities found at a hardware level, they're not going to get fixed. If the device blows up, it's not going to be replaceable with a similar device. Okay, so that presents risk. That presents service delivery risk as well as security risk. However, the really important one for me is end of security patching. So when security updates are no longer being provided, that is the absolute drop dead for anything, be it hardware or software. So it's something that, from the infrastructure side, is an absolute pain in the arse to manage through. And I've worked in organisations where this was done. It has been done very well and very badly. I've worked in organisations where it's been done very well and very manually, or very badly and very automated. There's all sorts of. There's a lot of scope for how you go about doing this, but it doesn't really matter. In the end, you have to know what. So it starts out with asset management. Do you know what you've got? Do you know where it is? Do you then track software and hardware support, software versioning, all the rest of this sort of stuff? And it is hard work. However, it is fair to say that a lot of organizations are compromised through things that could have been patched or should have been replaced. And didn't. 20 years ago, you could get away with the if it's working, don't touch it. Well, you couldn't really, but the time between vulnerability and compromise was much longer. And it gave you the opportunity to spot that there were active exploits and do something about them. Well, these days, that's just not the case. The likelihood that you're going to be able to identify that there's vulnerability that affects the out of date, end of life thing that you've got, and then successfully mitigate those risks before the exploits start being thrown around is very slim these days. Very low probability you're going to get ahead of the game there. So assess your technical debt. Maintain a holistic view of cyber risk. Okay, which is basically another way of saying something which I talk about a lot. You have to be aligning cyber risk with business risk. As cybersecurity professionals, we have a particular view on what constitutes a risk. The business may have a completely different view on what constitutes a risk. So a vulnerable device, let's say, offering a legacy service in a segregated part of the network may well flag up from a cyber perspective as high risk because it's got lots of high risk vulnerabilities on it, for example. From a business perspective, it may be quite low risk. There may well be, and I've been in this situation, you may be in the position where you're running a legacy service. You've got an agreement with the customer that the devices that run this service do not have unlimited lifespan. They can't be replaced. The service won't be moved on to anything newer. You'll continue to deliver the service for as long as you can. However, at some point, please recognise this will stop. Now, I've actually been in that situation with an old Texas Instruments line printer in a previous organisation. And eventually the hardware died. It just, well, in fact, it had to be powered off for an office move, and it didn't power back on again. Same thing though, if that service doesn't matter to the business, it's not high risk from a cyber perspective, even though it may have high severity vulnerabilities in it, that kind of thing. Works the other way around. There are things that we might look at and go, well, that's a pretty, it's a pretty difficult vulnerability to exploit. It's got various mitigations around it. We're probably going to be okay, take the risk sort of thing. But the business might say, well, actually, our entire business requires that thing to be working. So you may see this as just a handful of low severity vulnerabilities. We see this though as any impact to service in that device would would have a very significant impact on the ability of the business to continue trading. And I've also been in situations like that as well. Zero downtime, back end financial services infrastructure, global infrastructure, things then that you would look at and go, yeah, do you know what? Surely you can live with that risk. Well, the answer was no. There'd been a decision at the board, a very well-informed decision at the board, that no vulnerabilities were acceptable. So there was a great deal of process put in place around tracking, remediating, and understanding dispensations when things couldn't be immediately remediated, and fairly short turnarounds for patching and so on and so forth. So that involves a good understanding of aligning your business risk and your cyber risk so that you're all aiming to protect the right stuff. They then talk about practice good information governance. Yeah, that one's pretty self-explanatory. They're talking about, though, in this case, one of the things that is very important is to understand when you're recovering stuff, what's the importance, and what's the focus of what should be being recovered after outage, be that an ITIL type, infrastructure outage or a cyber event or whatever it may be. What you don't want is to have your limited resources basically restoring and rebuilding things that aren't the priority for the business. Comes back to understand your business risk again, and what technology is supporting your business risk. So I think if your business continuity plans or your business continuity plans should be driving your disaster recovery plans. Business continuity being, just as a quick reminder for the difference, business continuity being how do I get services working that are supporting the business, in the sense of how can we be operational again and doing the things that we should be doing as a business, even if that's just the minimum stuff at the moment. Disaster recovery is how do I stand back up and recover technical systems if they have been compromised or have failed or whatever it might be. So business continuity drives disaster recovery. Disaster recovery overlaps a whole load of areas. Anything that prevents the business from doing its job properly may have a disaster recovery and would definitely have a business continuity aspect. As part of your business continuity, it's really important to understand your recovery time objectives and your recovery point objectives. And again, those two are poorly understood. So as a really quick summary again, recovery time objective is based on how quickly do I need this particular business process to be working again. Imagine, for example, you have end of month activities. They're only run at the end of the month. If the system supporting them fail at the beginning of the month, you've got a month in which you can get those things stood back up again. If they fail in the last week of the month, for example, all of a sudden your recovery time objective goes from being, let's say, 4 weeks down to a number of hours. So you need to understand that, and they're fluid, they're not fixed in time. I've seen a lot of this stuff that's written as, okay, well, we can live without this service for 2 days. We can work around this for a week. This thing needs 0 downtime. This thing needs to be stood back up within an hour. Okay. Does it always? I think it's a good start to at least understand that, but does it always need to be stood up within an hour, or does it only need to be stood up within an hour at certain times? Actually being a little sophisticated with that is very important. But you should know, for all your critical business processes, should know what the recovery time objective is. So how long can the business continue without significant impact if that particular service isn't functioning? Recovery point objective is when you're restoring it, where do you bring it back to? I've worked in, as I say, in financial infrastructure. Those services were globally important down to individual transactions. There was an awful lot of money that was at stake. So you could not replay a transaction. You could not miss a transaction. So if there was a great deal of very clever coding put in place that tracked exactly which transactions had or hadn't been processed, so that if the system was brought down from infrastructure or from cyber, bringing it back to exactly the right point was a possibility. If you're looking at like emails, well, if you're going to recover your email system, do you need it to be recoverable up to the last hour, last minute, last whatever? Could you actually survive if it was recovered back to yesterday morning? That sort of thing. So recovery point objective is what point in time are you recovering the data or the systems to? So if you've got both of those things right, you should then, in a significant incident, be able to recover the systems back to the right systems, the critical systems recovered back to the right point within the period of time that allows you to continue to deliver your services. Then the final thing, because I appreciate this, this has turned into a slightly longer briefing, but adopt defense in depth. Pretty obvious. One of the things that would have helped the British Library would have been that if they'd have had MFA installed on the servers, and if they had segregated networks into multiple segments. I mean, what's now kind of referred to as micro-segmentation, as being we've just discovered this amazing way of limiting the impact of issues. Yes, well, no brown stuff, Sherlock. We were doing all that 30 years ago. So yeah, segmentation. Why should things be able to talk to things they don't need to talk to? Maybe that's just me. Antisocial, like sitting in my own office on my own, rarely leaving the house, don't talk to people. Why should my servers do the same? Right, that's enough. I will let you all go. Thank you for listening if you're still with me, and I will speak to you all again.